And we're live. And we're live. Did you miss me, Canucks fans? We're live. Hello and welcome to an emergency edition of Canucks Conversation. Obviously, lots happening right now. I am joined by Jeff Pettersson, who thankfully was already in studio getting ready to watch a Canucks game and, of course, do rink-wide Vancouver. Jeff, it's come down. We knew it was coming. He's been in the AHL for a while. Erik Brannstrom heads to the New York Rangers. Oh, and he's joined by JT Miller. It's finally happened. This saga, we've heard about this for a long time, it feels like. Elias Pettersson and JT Miller, one of them was going to be traded. It is JT Miller being traded to the New York Rangers. Live reaction.
Yeah, it's a lot to process. I mean, we've had lots of time, obviously, to sort of formulate some thoughts through the season that it might happen. And then with the explosive comments of Jim Rutherford earlier in the week, you kind of got a sense that it was going to happen. It was a question of, would it happen before Four Nations? Would it happen before the trade deadline? Would it push to the summer? It's done. And we should probably recap for people that are just joining the entirety of the deal, because we now know all of the pieces. And I know you're trying to have some fun with Erik Brannstrom, and he is a piece of it, obviously. I think people are more concerned with what's coming this way. JT Miller out the door, and Filip Chytil is the centerpiece, a 25-year-old Czech center who has underwhelming numbers this year, and has a history of head injuries. Quite frankly, 10 games for the New York Rangers last season. So there is risk here, just 11 goals and 9 assists, 20 points in the 41 games that he's played. It's Filip Chytil. It's big right-handed defenseman Victor Mancini, who's in Hartford, but he's played 15 games for the New York Rangers. Has 5 points in 15 games. Doesn't profile necessarily as an offensive guy, but he's put up a few points at the very least. And the right side, I think, is the important part there, and a protected first-round draft pick. So that's what the Canucks are recouping for JT Miller, Erik Brannstrom, and Jackson Dorrington, a college prospect who we'll see where it goes for him, but a long shot to make the National Hockey League.
Lots of reaction here. People in the chat right now asking about the prospect, Victor Mancini. We're going to get more reaction to him. Frank Saravalli's hopefully going to join us later in this show as well. But a quick look at Mancini, the prospect coming back in this deal. Can you call him a prospect? He's 22. He's a right shot defenseman. 6'3", 229 is what he's listed at. And as you said, Jeff, some decent numbers in Hartford this year. 3 goals, 7 assists through 23 games. Again, you look at the right side of the Canucks blue line, and I make a lot of jokes about Noah Juulsen, but is it crazy to say that Victor Mancini might get a look in the NHL, and if not, he's going to be in the AHL in Abbotsford, where the Canucks really trust what they're doing? When you take into consideration that they pull off this move with the pieces that they're getting back with Chytil, Mancini, and a first-round pick on top of it, and that they didn't retain any money in the deal, which is what someone's asking. Frank Saravalli reporting that the Canucks did not retain money. I think all things considered, if the Canucks made it clear to everybody that they were going to have to trade JT Miller, I think the Canucks came away just fine in this trade.
Well, they get out from under the entirety of the contract, and we all wondered how it was going to age. I think that conversation has shifted somewhat this year, given the fact that JT just hasn't looked anything like the JT Miller that was this explosive 100-point player, absolute playoff warrior and beast, and has just been meek and mild, unfortunately, and the 10-game personal leave, 9 goals in 40 games for JT Miller. I don't have to tell Canuck fans, they've watched. He had the big game in Montreal on January the 6th, and 1 goal since then in St. Louis the other night, 35 points in 40 games. That in itself isn't a terrible number. It's not that far off a point a game, but it's all of the other stuff that has led to this moment. It's the fact that the interpersonal relationship with Elias Pettersson in that locker room, they just couldn't bridge the gap. And again, when Jim Rutherford spoke earlier this week to Gary Mason, you got the sense that he wasn't messing around. He was laying it bare for everybody to see that this wasn't a media construct, that this was eating away at the hockey club. It was one of the reasons that the Canucks have sputtered. It's one of the reasons the Canucks find themselves in this moment below the playoff bar in the Western Conference when they had these grand designs on being better than they were last year when they won 50 times and got to 109 points. So it felt like something had to give, and I think the Canucks are hoping in some way, Dave, that this is addition by subtraction. Again, Filip Chytil not going to come in here and light the world on fire. I guess big picture for me is, again, the Canucks still think that they're a playoff team. If they get to the playoffs, they're going to run into another really good opponent. We know that Elias Pettersson struggled mightily in the postseason last year. Is Elias Pettersson and Filip Chytil as a 1-2 punch down the middle. Does that throw fear into other opponents in the Western Conference of the National Hockey League? But I guess you have to ask, what does clearing the air in that locker room? Elias Pettersson, it's all on you now, and we know what it's been to this point in the season. If this was a stumbling block, if this was holding him back, and we think that it was, well, that obstacle's been removed. And again, this is a guy that doesn't love noise in the marketplace. Well, guess what? The volume is going to be deafening around Elias Pettersson because he's the last guy standing in this two-man battle, and this is his hockey club now. It's Quinn Hughes' hockey club, but in terms of the forwards, they need him to return to star-level stat, like starting tonight in Dallas. And let's see if that's going to happen.
Let's not lose sight of that. Canucks play Dallas very, very soon, and you will be on Rink-Wide Vancouver after the game to break it all down. And what you just said, Jeff, people in the chat bringing up that aspect of it as well. K-Town Chef bringing this up. When Miller was gone for his 10-game leave of absence, Elias Pettersson had 15 points. K-Town Chef says this: let's see if EP40 can look like he did while JT was out. He's going to have to be, because now it's all on him. Matchups and scoring will be on his shoulders going forward. Totally responsible gamer in the chat, great name there, says, yep, EP40 needs to pick it up or see ya. And let's not gloss over that aspect of it either, Jeff, that they've talked about the idea of trading both guys. This is, to me, what we were talking about earlier this week on Canucks Convo was, when you are deciding what you're going to do, I think the idea is you trade JT Miller, you see if that gets Elias Pettersson back to what he's been in the past, but if he continues to sputter, Canucks have until July 1 to get rid of him too. But of course, in season, people bringing up the point, okay, so who would be the number one center? Filip Chytil? I don't think the Canucks, who are still right in the thick of a playoff hunt, are going to do that, but it does give them some flexibility. It does give them a good runway to see what they really have in Elias Pettersson down this stretch here. And if this does improve his game at all, as you said, addition by subtraction. Anything else that stands out to you on this trade that you want to get to while we wait for Frank Saravalli?
Well, yeah, there's a bunch of things. One is, I would get Elias Pettersson back with Jake DeBrusk immediately, starting tonight. Like, Elias Pettersson's not going to be your home run hitter playing with Nils Höglander and Linus Karlsson. And I know that line played well in Nashville the other day. You brought Jake DeBrusk in to play with Elias Pettersson. DeBrusk gone ice cold here. If this is going to be Elias Pettersson's moment to shine and to spread his wings, it has to come with the best possible line mates. So I'm curious to see. Obviously, JT Miller's not playing. I would assume that Aatu Räty, who's up and on the roster, and you had to figure when they called up Aatu Räty midweek that was done because this was a distinct possibility. So Räty didn't play the other night in Nashville. We'll wait to see, but I would expect that you see Aatu Räty draw back in for the first time, I think, since early December. And again, you're going to be asking a fair bit of him. Not that he slides in to replace JT Miller in this hockey game, but then is Suter your number 2 center against one of the best defensive teams in the National Hockey League. They're sort of patchworking in Dallas. That happens when you make these kinds of trades. But I would think that the timing of this, to your point, Dave, Pettersson's trade protection doesn't kick in until July 1st. So they now have the rest of the regular season and the playoffs. And I think this is a really important piece of the equation because, look, EP40 sucked. He really struggled in the playoffs against both Nashville and Edmonton, and everybody kept waiting for it to happen. And, sometimes I wonder if that was part of this rift as well. The teammates were looking and saying, like, we're playing balls out here nightly. Like, where are you? And I could understand a little bit of frustration on their part. Then we found out about tendonitis and the offseason, and then he came back and nothing changed. So if they go and they make the playoffs and he struggles again, what does Rick Tocchet think about the chances of winning a Stanley Cup? What does Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford, what do they, like, they're already talking about the potential of trading this guy right now. But I think this probably is this runway that you talked about, that this is going to be his opportunity now to flourish. It's on him. Let's see what he looks like. Those 10 games without JT Miller, yes, he stepped up. That's his best 10-game stretch by a long shot this season. And so if clearing the air, if it can help get Elias Pettersson back to the star form that he has shown in his career, then, I suppose on that front, like, it has the potential here. Just moving out an obstacle for this guy to be the player that he once was, they need him back. and let's see where it goes from here starting tonight in Dallas. But I would play him with better players than Nils Höglander and Linus Karlsson.
I think that's a fair take, even if that line looked great, Jeff, even if they looked great in their last game. I think you're absolutely right. And it starts tonight. This idea of added temperature, added pressure on Elias Pettersson. It does start tonight. It starts in about 20 minutes time, Jeff. It's going to start tonight. And look, like, we know the trade's coming down. It's already been reported that JT Miller's going to be scratched in this game and that it is a done deal. I'm trying to see if it is yet official. The deal's not been made official, but we've seen enough from Saravalli, Friedman, Dhaliwal that it is a done deal. We just haven't seen the official tweet from the Canucks, which of course we are waiting on a little bit, but it looks like we know what's coming back in this trade. Folks, we have over 600 people watching the YouTube live show right now. Please make sure you like, subscribe to the channel. We're here 5 days a week on Canucks Conversation, me and Harman Dial, who unfortunately has to write right now. He has another job for The Athletic, so shout out to Harman. But yes, Jeff Pettersson joining me, and Jeff, of course, the host of Rinkwide Vancouver. Okay, now, this is interesting because there are the majority of people, and Jacob, put up a poll question. Technical producer Jacob Lazar, put up a poll question here in the YouTube. I'm curious just if people like this return or not, if they're happy with this trade. Simple question. I'm not asking you to get into the weeds. Just as a Canucks fan, when you see this trade, are you happy with this trade? Are you upset with this trade? And not for the reasons of, I'm upset that it didn't work out between Elias Pettersson and JT Miller. You're allowed to be upset about that. I think that's the biggest thing in this trade, Jeff. The biggest part of this story is that these are two guys paid millions and millions of dollars that both signed here to play here long term, and they couldn't figure it out together. And that's not all on JT Miller. Even though he's the guy that gets traded, that's not all on JT Miller. It's not. It takes two to tango, and the organization, as we heard from Jim Rutherford this week, they have tried to make it work, and it wasn't going to work out. You can be upset about that, but when you look at all of the circumstances that have played into this trade that we now see today on this fine Friday afternoon, are you happy with the trade? Because in the chat, I'm seeing a lot of people give reasons they like it. I'm seeing people give reasons they don't like it. I'm seeing reasons people say it's skeptical. To me, like, this is one of the best outcomes I think you could ask for a really crappy situation, other than the one that we were all hoping for, these two guys figuring it out and being able to play together. But if the team feels that they weren't able to get to that point, one of them had to go. I've made it clear earlier in the week, and Harman and I were talking about this as well. Of course, you trade the older player before you trade a young player like Elias Pettersson. Are you happy with the trade return? Votes are pouring in right now. 43% people right now say yes, 57% say no, and Jack Snow in the chat saying can't be happy losing the talent level of JT Miller. Others pointing out, obviously, it's the best of a crap sandwich. It's a long-term contract for Miller. People pointing out that he's probably never going to reach 90 or 100 points again. And Jeff, this was the other thing that Harman and I were talking about when it came to Pettersson and JT Miller. If you had to bet which one of these players would ever eclipse 100 points in their career ever again, like, who would you bet on? I think the answer is Elias Pettersson.
Yeah, I mean, with an asterisk, though, that you just have to see. I mean, he's barely going to get to half that this season unless he, cranks it up here in the second half. But yes, just based on potential with runway and age and aging curves and all those things, yes, I think almost everybody would bet on Elias Pettersson. Hey, we should mention the Canucks get out from the remainder of what was left of a hefty contract for JT Miller. Filip Chytil at 4.43. Remainder of this year and two beyond. So, with any trade, there's always opportunity cost, right? What do you do with the money that you save? And especially on a day where we find out that the cap is going up significantly, I think that's part of the reason a team like the Rangers, they can afford a JT Miller contract. One of the richest operations and organizations in the National Hockey League. He's familiar with them. They drafted him, and they're willing to take on the risk. And again, we'll see if a breath of fresh air helps JT Miller get back to being that fiery, passionate play driver that he has been for most of his time here in Vancouver. I just want to take a sec, Dave, and step back and just look at JT Miller's time in totality, acquired on the draft floor the second day of the 2019 draft here at Rogers Arena. And yeah, the Canucks were at a point where they were giving out first-round draft picks, and people were, I think, skeptical. They won that trade hands down, slam dunk. JT Miller turned out to be one of the best Vancouver Canucks. I think he was headed towards having a number in the rafters if he had stayed here and finished out his career, but that's obviously not going to happen now. But this is a guy that wore his heart on his sleeve, played remarkably hard, was the heart and soul, so much comparison to a Ryan Kessler from, the decade before. Just fiery, passionate guys that wanted to win at all costs. Ultimately, that may have got him into some trouble here, and part of the reason that he's no longer a member of the Vancouver Canucks, but just in terms of his on-ice performance up until this season, and particularly in the playoffs last year, the Vancouver Canucks could not have asked for more from JT Miller. When they were down in hockey games, who led them back? More often than not, it was JT Miller. Scored some massive goals for them, put up 99 points, and I kind of thought, he may never get another opportunity. Well, proved me wrong, came back and got 103. He put in some shifts for this hockey club, and he has to be saluted for that. But I also think he was a big part of the reason why he is the first one out the door here in this battle between two star players that just couldn't coexist.
Let's bring in our star player, Frank Saravalli of Daily Faceoff, who is all over this trade. Frank, thank you so much for joining us on short notice. We appreciate it. Do you know the conditions of this pick? That is the first thing that everybody's asking in our chat right now.
Yeah, so the conditions are super simple. It's top 13 protected, and if the New York Rangers would happen to be picking inside the top 13 with that selection, then the pick will then transfer to 2026 for the Canucks. And at that point, the pick would be unprotected. So I think in a best case scenario, given what we know about this year's draft class and that 2026 is expected to be stronger, the best case scenario for the Canucks would be that pick does transfer to 2026. Okay.
Just your initial reaction to this trade. Do you like it for the Canucks?
I think they had to rip the Band-Aid off. 3-game winning streak or not, it was time. And the biggest win in this deal for the Canucks is getting off of JT Miller's contract. This deal in principle isn't hugely different than the one that was on the table 10 days or 2 weeks ago when it fell apart. Essentially what happened is, believe it or not, the Canucks actually had to add slightly with Eric Brandstrom and Jackson Dorrington in order to get this over the finish line. Because I'm told the deal that was coming back then was Filip Chytil, a similarly protected first-round pick, and a prospect. In this case, I think Mancini qualifies and fits that bill. But the Rangers, I believe, had agreed to the deal. And when they ran it up the flagpole inside their own organization to get it green-lit, that's when they ran into an issue from ownership saying, hey, we can't take on this deal. This is a 31-year-old center. We already have one of those under contract until he's 37 and Mika Zibanejad in a deal that isn't looking great for us. We've got to figure out a different solution here. And so since the Canucks were not willing to retain, that's kind of what the holdup was the last couple weeks. And essentially the Rangers had to come back and find a way to get Vancouver to sweeten it, so to speak, in order to appease and get this deal over the finish line.
Frank, what are the Canucks getting in Filip Chytil? 11 goals, 20 points so far this season. The guy that had serious injury issues a year ago. When he's on his game and doing things well, what are Canuck fans going to see in Filip Chytil?
I think he's closer to a third-line center than a second-line center. And I think with the injury history that he has, it's hugely concerning to me. The cost certainty is nice, particularly with the cap going up. But here's the thing. This is a player that the Vancouver Canucks have long been a believer in. I think they've had interest in Filip Chytil going back multiple years. And to be able to get him as the centerpiece of the deal, they're clearly happy about that. They feel like he's someone that could be a problem solver for them. And let's face it, the biggest linchpin to this entire deal is not anything that the Canucks are getting back. It's Elias Pettersson. Period, full stop, end of story. Can removing JT Miller from this equation allow Pettersson to get back to being the north of a point per game player and play driving center that this team needs him to be and is paying him to be? Make no mistake, he's on the clock. he's got the rest of this season to figure it out, because if not, I have zero doubt that the Vancouver Canucks will be pulling the trigger before the no trade clause kicks in on July 1st, because they won't be able to afford to find out the hard way and lose leverage. I think even they are right now skeptical of where Pettersson's game is at. A huge red flag for them, as Jim Rutherford talked about this week, was the idea that he had a hugely disappointing playoff run. They didn't like the way that he handled his knee injury. And then to come into camp and not be ready to play, they saw that as a big red flag. Now, we all saw Pettersson's game improve and tick up in the time that Miller had missed in the lineup this year, which gives you some hope. But that's not, if you can have Pettersson as that true play driving 1C, and you can pencil him in for the next 7 years at that and not have to think about it, it makes whatever you get out of Filip, whether he is 2C or 3C, a lot easier to deal with based on how Pettersson plays.
Okay, Frank, I guess the answer might be yes based on what you just said, but was there an added sense of urgency from the Canucks to get this Miller trade done to give them that runway and get a good look at Elias Pettersson looks like without JT Miller?
Not just for Pettersson's sake, but I think for the overall sake of the team. Look, no secrets here. It's been out there and talked about for a while. That's kind of why I was a little bit perplexed at the coverage that the Jim Rutherford comments this week received. We didn't learn anything new. Teams around the league that were in the marketplace to acquire JT Miller or Elias Pettersson, they didn't learn anything new. So it's not like the Canucks hurt their market value or anything like that in discussing this openly. This was obviously a really poorly kept secret. And the longer that this had dragged on, JT Miller also just kind of put his hands up and said, all right, it's time. Let's get this over with. Let's rip off the Band-Aid. And he was ready to go. The Canucks were ready for him to move. And I think, again, everyone's in that locker room, according to multiple sources that have, been in conversation with these guys, including, others that I talk to on a regular basis. They're not entirely sold that Pettersson's here for the long haul. So it's going to be about figuring that part out next, and the increased runway and time to be able to pull that off. Sure. But it was also about helping get this season back on track too.
Well, it's interesting too. Timing is always everything in life. I don't think this was any sort of reaction to what the Calgary Flames did, but the Canucks are jockeying with the Calgary Flames. Flames make their move last night, and I think we all think that they added some scoring depth and get better in the here and now. And I do wonder if just moving the distractions and clearing the air, if the Canucks think that can help them be a better hockey club here moving down the stretch.
Yeah, that plus also now this draft capital and cap space. I don't believe that if, look, whatever happens with this pick in relatively short order, I don't know that we're going to see these conditions even play out, whether it's still in Vancouver's arsenal or not. I think they fully intend to take the increased cap flexibility that they have now and package that with the draft pick that they have and find a way to improve this team right here in the here and now, whether that's going out to finally get that top 4 puck moving defenseman, whether it's to try and better supplant this team down the middle and support it, whether it's using the Brock Besser trade chip, whatever it might be. I don't expect the Canucks roster that you see tonight after this trade is made to be the same one that you're going to see on March 8th on the other side of the deadline.
That's very interesting. That was going to be my final question for you, Frank, is where do you think Brock Besser fits into all of this? Your gut reaction, do they trade Brock Besser ahead of the trade deadline?
My gut reaction is no. And look, a lot of it's going to have to do with how the Canucks play between now and then. If they play themselves out of it and they're not in the mix, there's not really much of an incentive to keep Brock Besser. I understand that this negotiation has been slow going. In fact, from what I know about this negotiation, I would say that there hasn't even really been one. These two sides have been very content to let this season play out. You can view that through whatever prism you want. But at the same time, I think Brock Besser is comfortable playing in that position. And I think the Canucks are comfortable learning as much about Brock Besser's game and where he's at along the way. They're mutually using each other, so to speak. And so what that looks like on the other end of it, I think if they play out the string and he walks, the Canucks are okay with that. And he's okay playing it out in Vancouver too. So I think there's mutual comfortability there. And I don't think there's any animosity right now with the way that this has unfolded, that both sides understand where they're at and they're just going to keep grinding away, because if you think about it, it's kind of all really Brock Besser's ever known in Vancouver.
Folks, make sure you subscribe to the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Any final thoughts, gentlemen? We're cutting it close. It's almost Canucks game time. Any final thoughts? I see Jeff.
I just see the Canucks have posted their starting lineup for this game down in Dallas, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, Dave, just before Frank joined us, but Elias Pettersson starting this game centering Brock Besser and Jake DeBrusk. So you move JT Miller out of the mix, and you give Elias Pettersson the two best wingers that you have in your organization, and you see if he can spread his wings and fly starting tonight at American Airlines Center.
He's on the clock.
It's on the clock. Frank, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me, gentlemen. Folks, like I said, make sure you subscribe, like the Canucks Army YouTube channel, and I know we have over 7,000 people watching on Twitter right now, so thanks so much for tuning in to an emergency edition of Canucks Conversation. Frank Cervelli, Jeff Pettersson, my name is Dave Quadrelli. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.